They laughed when I walked into that restaurant in uniform, my own parents, red-faced with shame. The whispers spread like wildfire through the crowded dining room, their eyes avoiding mine as if my presence alone was an embarrassment. But when the seal across the room suddenly stood, his chair scraping against the marble floor, and raised his hand in a crisp salute directed at me, the whole place went silent. This is the story of how a woman they dismissed as a failure made the truth impossible to ignore. My name is Alyssa Monroe, and I've spent the last decade perfecting the art of disappearing in plain sight. Tonight, sitting at this overcrowded family dinner in downtown Savannah, I'm doing it again, shrinking into my chair while my father's booming voice fills the private dining room we've reserved for what he calls a proper Monroe gathering. The restaurant smells of aged wood and expensive bourbon, the kind of place where military brass come to reminisce about their glory days. My father, Colonel Greg Monroe, retired Army, fits right in. His silver hair catches the amber light from the chandelier as he raises his glass for the third time tonight, toasting my brother Jason's latest accomplishment, something about expanding his veteran training facility to 3 locations. Now that's what I call service to the community, Dad declares, his chest puffing with pride. Real leadership, real discipline, the kind of man who makes the Monroe name mean something. Jason grins, accepting the praise with practiced ease. He's wearing his customary tactical pants and fitted black shirt, the uniform of a man who wants everyone to know he's still connected to the military world, even though he's been out for 5 years. His biceps flex as he reaches for his beer, a calculated move that draws appreciative glances from the other diners. I adjust my Air Force dress blues, the fabric stiff against my shoulders, the ribbons on my chest carefully selected to show only the unclassified ones feel like costume jewelry compared to the weight of what I can't display. My fingers trace the edge of my water glass, counting the seconds until someone notices I'm in uniform. It doesn't take long. Alyssa, sweetheart. My mother's voice cuts through the celebration, her southern accent sharpening with disapproval. Was it really necessary to wear that tonight? This is a family dinner, not a recruitment drive. The table goes quiet. 12 pairs of eyes turn to me, aunts, uncles, cousins, all waiting to see how I'll respond to Margaret Monroe's perfectly manicured criticism. I came straight from base, Mom. Didn't have time to change. The lie rolls off my tongue easily. I've been home for 3 hours. Jason snorts, leaning back in his chair. Still flying that desk. Sis must be exhausting. All that paperwork. The table erupts in polite laughter, the kind that stings worse than outright mockery. I keep telling her she should come work for me. I could teach her what real combat training looks like. I bite the inside of my cheek, tasting copper. If only they knew about the nights I've spent threading helicopters through mountain passes in total darkness, or the weight of 6 unconscious soldiers I've dragged from burning wreckage. But classified means classified, and my NDA is ironclad. At least she's trying, Aunt Patricia offers weakly, patting my hand like I'm a child who needs consolation. Not everyone can be Jason. Dad's jaw tightens, his disappointment evident. Patricia's right. Not everyone has what it takes. He doesn't look at me when he says it, but everyone knows who he means. When I served, women in combat roles were, well, let's just say things were different, more honest about capabilities. The words land like shrapnel, each one finding its mark. I've heard variations of this speech my whole life, how I'm too soft, too quiet, too female to carry on the Monroe military legacy. How Jason, with his gym and his war stories from a supply unit in Kuwait, is somehow more of a soldier than I'll ever be. My mother leans close, her breath warm against my ear. Her whisper meant only for me, but somehow loud enough for Jason to hear. Sweetheart, just try not to embarrass us again when Robert's friends arrive. You know how they talk, and that uniform of yours. It draws attention. The wrong kind. Robert Dad's golf buddy, a retired general who's joining us for dessert. Another audience for my humiliation. I stand abruptly, my chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "Excuse me, I need some air." Nobody stops me as I walk toward the balcony doors. Behind me, I hear Jason making another joke about Chair Force officers and their brutal battles with Excel spreadsheets. More laughter follows, echoing off the walls like gunfire. Outside, the savannah humidity wraps around me like a wet blanket. The city lights blur through my tears, tears I refuse to let fall. My hands grip the balcony railing until my knuckles turn white, and I make a promise to myself, speaking it into the thick night air. Next time I won't stay quiet. Because there will be a next time. There always is with the Monroe family. But something has to change. The weight of my silence has become heavier than any soldier I've ever carried, and I'm tired of bearing it alone. I don't know how yet, but someday, somehow, they'll understand who I really am, and when that day comes, I won't need their approval anymore. The door opens behind me. 5 minutes, Alyssa. My mother calls. Robert just arrived. I straighten my uniform, squaring my shoulders. 5 minutes to prepare for another round of humiliation. But as I turn back toward the dining room, my reflection catches in the glass door, and for just a moment, I don't see the disappointment my family projects onto me. I see Spectre 1, and she's done being invisible. The nightmares still come at 3:15 a.m. like clockwork. I'm back in the cockpit of my MH-60 Pavehawk, the Hindu Kush Mountains rising like black teeth against a moonless sky. The mission briefing echoes in my head. Extract SEAL Team 7 from a compromised position. Codename Iron Wave. My call sign Spectre 1. In my dreams, I can still smell the aviation fuel mixing with dust, feel the stick vibrating in my hands as we dive through the valley at 90 feet, rotors barely clearing the canyon walls. My co-pilot, Martinez, is counting down our approach in that steady voice of his. 30 seconds to LZ. Spectre 1. But dreams have a way of jumping to the worst parts. Suddenly we're taking fire, the distinctive crack of RPGs cutting through the rotor wash. The impact throws me against my harness, alarms screaming as we lose hydraulics. Martinez is shouting coordinates into the radio while I fight to keep us airborne, blood running down my face from where my helmet cracked against the window. "We're going down," I hear myself say, calm despite the chaos. Brace for impact. The crash is different every time I dream it, but the aftermath is always the same. I wake up in the wreckage, Martinez unconscious beside me, and 6 Navy SEALs scattered across the mountainside like broken dolls. The team leader, I never learned his name then, just his eyes. Gray like winter storms, has a piece of shrapnel embedded in his shoulder. He's trying to move, trying to reach his rifle, even though his left leg is bent at an impossible angle. "Stay down," I tell him, my training taking over. "I've got you." What happened next earned me a distinguished flying cross that sits in a classified file somewhere in the Pentagon, a medal my family will never see. One by one, I dragged those men to cover, using strength I didn't know I possessed. The SEAL team leader kept trying to help despite his injuries, kept asking my name. I never gave it. Operational security, even when we thought we were going to die on that mountain. The extraction took 4 hours. 4 hours of defending our position with salvaged weapons, calling in danger-close air support, keeping Martinez and the others alive with field medicine I'd learned but never thought I'd use. When the rescue birds finally arrived at dawn, the SEAL leader grabbed my arm with his good hand. "I'll find you," he said, blood loss making his words slur. "I'll find you and thank you properly." "Just doing my job," I replied, the standard response we're trained to give, but it was more than that. It was the moment I became who I really am, not Greg Monroe's disappointing daughter, not Jason's underachieving sister, but Spectre 1, the pilot who brought everyone home alive. The investigation that followed was thorough and quiet. We'd stumbled into something bigger than a simple extraction, intelligence that couldn't be compromised. They gave me a choice: accept a promotion to a desk position with full honors that my family could know about, or continue flying classified operations under a veil of secrecy that would make me look like a nobody pushing papers. I chose the shadows. For 3 more years, I flew missions that don't exist, saved lives that were never in danger according to official records, earned ribbons that went straight into a vault. When a back injury finally grounded me permanently, another helicopter crash, this one in a country I'm not allowed to name, they handed me a medical discharge certificate that made my service look like one long, unremarkable stint in logistics. "Sign here," the JAG officer said, sliding the non-disclosure agreement across the table. "Everything about Spectre 1 stays classified for life. You understand what that means?" I understood. It meant coming home to Savannah with nothing to show for 7 years but some generic ribbons and a vague job description. It meant listening to Jason brag about his supply runs in Kuwait while I bit my tongue about the Taliban fighters I'd outmaneuvered in narrow valleys. It meant watching my father's face fall every time he introduced his children. "This is Jason. He runs tactical training for veterans. And Alyssa, she's in the Air Force." The isolation was worse than any physical wound. PTSD doesn't care about classification levels, and I couldn't even tell my therapist the real sources of my trauma. The guilt of Martinez, who died 2 years later in a motorcycle accident, never knowing I visited his grave every month. The weight of those secrets, pressing down like the mountains I used to fly through. My apartment became a sanctuary of silence. No photos from my service, no war stories at bars, no connections to the people who knew Spectre 1. Just me and my memories, locked away as securely as the files bearing my call sign. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if I broke that silence, if I stood up at one of those family dinners and told them everything. But the penalty for violating my NDA isn't just legal, it's knowing that other operators like me would lose their cover, their safety, their ability to do what we do in the shadows. So I learned to live with their disappointment, to absorb their mockery like body armor absorbs bullets. Each joke about my desk job, each dismissive comment about women in the military, each comparison to Jason's real service, I took them all, added them to the weight I was already carrying. Silence became my only armor, wrapped so tight around me that sometimes I forgot there was a person underneath it, a pilot who'd once been called the best in her squadron, a woman who'd earned the respect of Navy SEALs with her actions, not her words. But armor, no matter how strong, develops cracks over time. And mine were starting to show. The Monroe family reunion was scheduled for 2:30 p.m. on a Saturday in March, but I arrived at 2:25. Parking my sedan between Jason's lifted truck and Dad's pristine Lincoln. The country club's manicured lawn stretched before me like a battlefield I knew I'd lose. But I walked across it anyway, my footsteps steady on the limestone path. Inside the private banquet hall, Jason held court near the bar, surrounded by his usual audience of veteran gym buddies and potential investors. His voice carried across the room, animated and loud as he demonstrated some tactical maneuver with dramatic hand gestures. "The thing about real combat," he was saying, "is that it changes you. You can't teach that to someone who's only ever filed flight plans and weather reports." His eyes found me as I entered, a smirk playing at his lips. "Speaking of which, look who decided to grace us with her presence." The crowd turned, their gazes sliding over me with familiar dismissal. I was wearing civilian clothes jeans and a simple blouse, having learned that my uniform only made things worse at family gatherings. But even without it, I felt exposed, vulnerable. "Alyssa." Mom's voice cut through the crowd as she approached, her smile tight with practiced hospitality. "You're almost on time. How wonderful." She air-kissed my cheek, then whispered, "Please try to be social today. Jason's announcing his 4th gym location, and there are important people here." Dad appeared beside her, his handshake firm but brief. "Good to see you could make it. How's the... What is it you do again?" "Personnel management." "Logistics coordination," I corrected quietly, the lie bitter on my tongue. Right. Well, Jason's been telling us about his new training program for Special Forces veterans. Real cutting-edge stuff. You should listen in, might learn something applicable to your paperwork. They drifted away, leaving me alone by the entrance. I made my way to an empty table in the corner, my usual refuge at these events. From here, I could observe without being observed, document without being documented. I pulled out my phone, opening the Notes app I'd been using for months now. Not for revenge, I told myself, but for proof. Proof that this was real, that I wasn't imagining the constant diminishment, the casual cruelty wrapped in family concern. March 16th, 2:45 p.m. I typed. Dad introduced Jason to Senator Williams as my son, the warrior. Introduced me as my daughter. She's also here. 3:10 p.m. Cousin Derek asked if I was still playing pilot or if I'd found a real career yet. 3:22 p.m. Jason's speech about his veteran gym. Unlike some people who hide behind desks, I'm still serving those who actually fought. Each entry was a small cut, but together they formed a pattern of systematic erasure. I wasn't just forgotten at these gatherings, I was actively rewritten. My service minimized until it barely existed. Why do you always sit alone? I looked up to find my Aunt Catherine standing beside me, her expression softer than the others. She'd always been the kindest of the Monroe clan, though her kindness often felt like pity. Just taking a breather, I said, closing my phone. She sat down uninvited, her perfume overwhelming in its proximity. You know, dear, have you ever thought about other options? Jason mentioned he could use someone to handle administrative work at his new gym. It would keep you in the military family, so to speak, but in a more suitable role. I felt something crack inside me. Suitable. Well, you know, less stressful, more appropriate for... She gestured vaguely at me, unable to find the words for whatever she thought I was lacking. For a woman, I supplied, my voice steadier than my hands. Oh, Alyssa, don't be dramatic. I'm trying to help. We all are. It's just that watching you struggle to keep up with Jason and the others, it's painful for your parents. They want to be proud of both their children. The implication hung between us. They could be proud of me if I just stopped trying to be something I clearly wasn't. Jason's voice boomed across the room again, calling everyone to attention for his big announcement. As the crowd gathered around him, I stayed in my corner, typing one final note, 3:35 p.m. Aunt Catherine suggests I give up and work for Jason. She thinks she's being kind. They all do. They think their cruelty is kindness. Their dismissal is concern. They think I'm the one who needs fixing. I looked up from my phone to find Jason pointing at me from across the room. See, even my sister knows her limits. She's got the good sense to stay where she belongs in the background, supporting those of us who do the real work. The laughter that followed was louder than usual, fueled by afternoon cocktails and mob mentality. Mom and Dad stood beside Jason, their faces glowing with pride for their son, carefully avoiding looking in my direction. I stood up slowly, my notebook clutched in my hand. For a moment, I considered walking over there, considered telling them all exactly what I thought, but the words stuck in my throat, held back by years of conditioning and that damned NDA. Instead, I wrote one last line. One day, truth won't need defending. Then I walked out, leaving behind the sound of their laughter and the weight of their disappointment. But I took something with me, the growing certainty that silence wouldn't protect me forever. Something had to give, and when it did, I'd be ready. The storm rolled into Savannah at 9:43 p.m., rattling my apartment windows with sheets of rain that sounded like distant rotor blades. I was nursing a cup of cold coffee, reviewing flight manuals I no longer needed but couldn't bring myself to throw away, when my laptop chimed with an encrypted email notification. My heart stopped. That particular chime meant only one thing: military secure channels, the kind I hadn't heard in 2 years since my medical discharge. I entered my authentication codes with trembling fingers, half expecting to see some administrative error. Maybe a records update or pension adjustment. The sender was listed as Navy Command Liaison Office. The subject line made my breath catch subject recognition, pending Operation Iron Wave. I stared at those words until they blurred. Iron Wave. The mission that had defined me and destroyed me in equal measure. The one that existed only in classified files and the nightmares of those who were there. My hands shook as I opened the message, Commander Monroe. This communication is classified under Section 7, Subsection 3 of the National Security Disclosure Act. Your NDA remains in effect. However, certain operational elements of Iron Wave have been declassified for limited ceremonial purposes. SEAL Team 7 Commander, Captain Andrew Cole, has submitted a formal request through appropriate channels to recognize your actions during the referenced operation. This request has been approved by JSOC Command Authority. Captain Cole has asked me to relay the following personal message. Spectre 1. I told you I'd find you. Took longer than expected, but SEALs don't forget their debts, especially not one this big. I've carried your call sign with me through 3 more tours, telling my men about the pilot who refused to leave us behind. Now it's time to tell it right. If you consent, Captain Cole requests to meet at the following coordinates: Tybee Island Naval Air Station Memorial Plaza. Saturday, 1100 hours. This meeting is voluntary. Your classification status remains unchanged, but certain public acknowledgments have been authorized within strict parameters. Regards, Commander Sarah Mitchell Navy, Command Liaison. I read the message 3 times before the words sank in. Andrew Cole, the SEAL team leader with storm gray eyes who'd tried to help despite his shattered leg. He'd not only survived but thrived, making captain. And somehow, he'd navigated the bureaucratic labyrinth to find me. Lightning illuminated my apartment, revealing the sparse decorations, the absence of military memorabilia that might invite questions. I lived like a ghost in my own life, haunted by service I couldn't speak about. But now someone was offering to speak for me. I pulled up Captain Cole's service record through the limited access I still maintained. Multiple bronze stars, a silver star, Purple Heart with 2 oak leaf clusters. Currently stationed at Naval Amphibious Base Little Creek, serving as training officer for East Coast SEAL teams. The photo showed a man in his early 40s, weathered but strong, with those same gray eyes I remembered from the mountainside. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Don't forget, Saturday is Jason's Veteran Gym Award ceremony. The whole family will be there. 6 p.m. at the Sterling Room. Wear something nice, not your uniform. Important people will be attending. I looked between the phone and laptop screen. Saturday. The same day Captain Cole wanted to meet. The same night my family planned to celebrate Jason's fake valor while dismissing my real service. Another email arrived, this time with attachments. Photos from Iron Wave that I'd never seen aerial reconnaissance shots of our crash site, the defensive position I'd established, the extraction zone I'd cleared while under fire. One image stopped my breath, a photo taken from a rescue helicopter, showing me carrying one of the SEALs across rocky terrain. My flight suit torn and bloodied, but my grip steady. The metadata had been scrubbed, but a note was attached. This is who you really are? See? I traced my finger across the screen, over the image of a woman I barely recognized anymore. She looked fierce, capable, unbreakable. Nothing like the disappointment my family saw when they bothered to look at me at all. The storm intensified outside, rain hammering against the windows like it was trying to break in. I opened my notebook, the one where I'd been documenting my family's dismissals, and wrote a single line. The truth is coming. I didn't know exactly what Captain Cole had planned, what limited ceremonial purposes meant, or how much of my story could finally be told. But I knew one thing with sudden crystal clarity: I would be at that Memorial Plaza on Saturday morning, and somehow, I'd make it to my family's celebration that evening. For the first time in years, I wouldn't be arriving as the failure they'd constructed in their minds. I'd be carrying something with me, not revenge, exactly, but recognition. Validation from someone who'd been there, who'd bled in the same dirt, who knew what Spectre 1 had really done on that mountainside. I composed my reply to Commander Mitchell, ma'am. I'll be there. Spectre 1. As I hit send, thunder shook the building, and the lights flickered but didn't go out. I sat back in my chair, feeling something I hadn't experienced since my last flight anticipation. The storm outside was nothing compared to what was building inside me. Saturday was coming, and with it, perhaps, the moment when silence would no longer be my only armor. The Coastal Base Cafe sat weathered and salt-worn at the edge of Tybee Island Naval Air Station, a relic from the Cold War days when fighters scrambled over the Atlantic. I arrived at 10:55 a.m., parking my sedan between two military vehicles that made it look even more civilian than usual. Captain Andrew Cole was already there, sitting at a corner table with a clear view of both entrances. Old habits die hard for operators. He stood as I approached, and I finally got a good look at the man I'd dragged half dead across Afghan rocks. Tall, broad-shouldered, with silver threading through dark hair cut to regulation. The limp was barely noticeable, just a slight favoring of his left leg. Those gray eyes, though they were exactly as I remembered. "Commander Monroe," he said, extending his hand. His grip was firm, calloused, real. "I'm not a commander anymore," I replied automatically. "Medical discharge 2 years ago. You'll always be Spectre 1 to me." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Coffee fair warning, it's Navy coffee, which means it could strip paint." Despite everything, I smiled. I've had worse. There was this fob in Kandahar that made coffee with water from a rusty tank. Fob Chapman. Yeah, that stuff could wake the dead. He poured me a cup from the carafe on the table, his movements precise despite the slight tremor in his left hand nerve damage, probably from that night. We sat in silence for a moment, two veterans sharing Navy coffee in a forgotten corner of a base most people didn't know existed. The morning sun cast long shadows through salt-hazed windows, and the distant sound of waves mixed with the hum of an old ceiling fan. "You know," he started, voice low and measured, "I've given hundreds of briefings about that night. Classified ones, of course. Training scenarios for my teams. But I could never use your real name. Never give you proper credit. Do you know what we called you in the reports?" I shook my head. "Ghostwriter, because you came out of nowhere, saved our asses, and disappeared into the classification system like you never existed." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a challenge coin, sliding it across the table. "Had this made anyway. Unofficial. But the team knows what it means." The coin was heavier than standard, made from actual bronze rather than cheap alloy. On one side, the SEAL Team 7 trident. On the other, a helicopter silhouette against mountain peaks and the words, "For valor above silence, Spectre 1. Captain Cole." "Andy," he interrupted, "after what you did, you've earned the right to use my first name." "Andy, I appreciate this, but you know I can't display it, talk about it, I know." He leaned forward, his voice dropping further. "But here's the thing. Parts of Iron Wave have been declassified. Not the intelligence we recovered, not the specifics of the location, but the fact that a joint operation occurred and that an Air Force pilot saved 6 Navy SEALs that's been cleared for limited disclosure." My heart started racing. How limited? Limited enough that I can publicly acknowledge you saved my team. Limited enough that I can salute you in front of whoever happens to be watching. His eyes held mine steadily. Limited enough that if, say, we happened to run into each other at a public venue, I could make it very clear who you really are. I set down my coffee cup carefully, afraid I might shatter it with my trembling hands. "Andy, what are you saying?" He pulled out his phone, showing me a social media post from Jason's gym. "Your brother's getting an award tonight. The Sterling Room, 6 p.m. Black tie optional. Veterans encouraged to wear dress uniforms." He looked up at me. "Funny thing, my dress whites are already in my car. Had them cleaned for a wedding tomorrow. but I think I might stop by the Sterling Room for dinner tonight. Around 7:30 p. maybe? After whatever ceremony is happening. That's my family's event. Is it? His expression was innocently neutral, but his eyes sparked with something fierce. Well, Savannah's a small place. Coincidences happen, and if I see someone there who deserves recognition. He shrugged. Seals don't leave debts unpaid. I stared at him. This man who'd spent years trying to find a way to thank me, who'd navigated military bureaucracy and classification levels just to say what needed to be said. Why, I asked finally, why go to all this trouble? He was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee. Because that night, when I was bleeding out and trying to stay conscious, you know what kept going through my head. Not the mission, not the intel we'd gathered. It was my daughter's birthday party the week before, her laughing at some stupid joke I'd made. I was sure I'd never hear that laugh again. His voice roughened. You gave me back every birthday, every Christmas, every bedtime story since then. My team Miller, Rodriguez, Thompson, Peck, Johnson. They all have families who don't even know your name but owe you everything. We owe you everything. He stood, straightening his civilian jacket. I can't fix the injustice of your silence. I can't change your NDA or make the Air Force give you public credit, but I can make sure that tonight, in front of whoever matters to you, someone bears witness to who you really are. My father's a retired Army colonel, I said quietly. He thinks I'm a disappointment. Andy's expression hardened. Then he needs glasses, or a reality check, maybe both. He headed for the door, then paused. 7:30, Spectre 1. Be there in uniform. Trust me. As he left, I sat alone with the challenge coin warming in my palm, its weight more substantial than any medal I'd never been allowed to wear. Through the salt-hazed window, I watched him walk to his car with that slight limp, carrying his debt and his determination like weapons. Tonight, my family would gather to celebrate Jason's hollow victory, and at 7:30 p.m., Captain Andrew Cole would walk through those doors. The storm wasn't coming anymore. It was here. The Sterling Room gleamed with calculated elegance, crystal chandeliers casting warm light over white tablecloths, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Savannah River, and enough brass and silver in the crowd to stock a military surplus store. I stood at the entrance at 6:15 p.m., my dress blues immaculate, every ribbon precisely placed, the weight of Andy's challenge coin hidden in my pocket. Alyssa. My mother materialized beside me, her face cycling through surprise, confusion, and finally, irritation. I specifically asked you not to wear that. It's a veterans event, Mom. The invitation said dress uniforms were encouraged. For real veterans, sweetheart, people who've actually... She trailed off, but her meaning hung clear in the air. She was wearing a black cocktail dress with Jason's gym logo pinned to her lapel like a badge of honor, championing the son who'd never seen combat while dismissing the daughter who had... The room was already filling with Jason's crowd gym investors, local politicians angling for the veteran vote, and a handful of actual combat veterans who Jason kept around for authenticity. Their uniforms bore the weight of real service, purple hearts and bronze stars that meant something. They looked at my basic ribbon rack with polite disinterest, unable to see the classified honors that should have been there. Dad was holding court near the bar, his army dress uniform still fitting perfectly despite retirement, his colonel's eagles catching the light as he gestured. He saw me and his face tightened almost imperceptibly, the look of a man whose expectations had been permanently adjusted downward. 6:20 p.m., I whispered to myself, checking my watch. 1 hour and 10 minutes. Jason's award ceremony began at 6:30 sharp. He took the stage in what he called his dress tactical black pants, black shirt, enough tactical gear to outfit a small squad, though none of it had seen anything more dangerous than gym sweat. The local Veterans Business Association president, A man who'd spent Vietnam behind a desk in Germany presented him with a crystal plaque for outstanding service to the veteran community. "This award," Jason began, his voice carrying that practiced humility he'd perfected, "isn't just for me. It's for all the real warriors who understand that the battle doesn't end when you come home. Unlike some people who hide behind paperwork and regulations, we're out here in the trenches, keeping the warrior spirit alive." Several people glanced my way. I kept my expression neutral, my back straight, my hands steady on the table. 7:05 p.m. Dad stood to make a toast, raising his scotch high. "To my son, who understands what service really means. Who didn't just wear the uniform, but lived it, breathed it, continues to embody it every day. The kind of veteran who makes a father proud." The room erupted in applause. Mom wiped away a tear. Cameras flashed, and I sat in my perfectly pressed uniform, invisible as always, counting down the minutes. 7:15 p.m. The main course arrived surf and turf, because of course it was. Jason regaled our table with a story about his time in Kuwait, somehow making inventory management sound like a special forces raid. The actual combat veterans in the room smiled politely, recognizing bullshit but too polite to call it out. "You know," Jason said, pointing his steak knife at me, "Sis here could learn a thing or two about real military bearing. Look at Thompson over there, Purple Heart, Bronze Star. That's what service looks like." Thompson, a Marine who'd lost 3 fingers in Fallujah, shifted uncomfortably. He'd been looking at me strangely all evening, like he was trying to place something familiar. 7:25 p.m. I felt the energy in the room shift before I saw him. It was subtle the way conversations near the entrance stopped, how servers paused mid-stride, the unconscious straightening of spines among the real veterans present. Captain Andrew Cole entered at 7:28 p.m., and the room changed. He was in full navy dress whites, the uniform immaculate, ribbons creating a rainbow across his chest that told stories of valor beyond anything Jason could imagine. The seal trident gleamed gold above his ribbons, and his cover was tucked perfectly under his left arm. He moved through the room with purpose, not swagger, the difference between someone who'd earned respect and someone who demanded it. "Holy shit," someone whispered. "Is that a Navy SEAL?" The crowd parted unconsciously as he walked, everyone sensing the presence of something authentic in a room full of pretense. Dad noticed the commotion and turned, his face lighting up at the sight of actual special operations nobility gracing Jason's event. But Andy wasn't walking toward Jason. He wasn't heading for the stage or the bar or the cluster of veterans by the windows. He was walking straight toward me. My heart hammered against my ribs as he approached. His gray eyes locked on mine with laser focus. The room seemed to hold its breath, everyone watching this decorated SEAL navigate through their celebration with obvious intent. He stopped directly in front of my table, in front of my parents, in front of Jason, who had just noticed the disturbance and was craning his neck to see what was happening. "Commander Alyssa Monroe," Captain Cole said, his voice carrying the kind of authority that filled every corner of the room. "United States Air Force." The silence was absolute. Even the servers had stopped moving. And then, in one fluid motion that would change everything, Captain Andrew Cole came to attention. The storm had arrived. The crack of Captain Cole's hand snapping to his brow in a perfect salute echoed through the Sterling room like a gunshot. The gesture was crisp, precise, held with the kind of respect reserved for Medal of Honor recipients and fallen heroes. "Commander Alyssa Monroe," he repeated, his voice carrying to every corner of the now silent room. "United States Air Force, the pilot who saved my life and the lives of my entire team during Operation Iron Wave." My mother's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble floor. The sound broke through the paralysis holding the room, but nobody moved to clean it up. "Spectre 1, Andy continued, still holding the salute. "The woman who flew into hell itself to pull us out. who crashed her bird saving us from RPG fire, then dragged 6 Navy SEALs to safety despite her own injuries, who held our position for 4 hours against enemy forces until extraction arrived. Jason's face had gone white. Dad's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The entire room seemed to lean in, drawn by the magnetic pull of Andy's words. "Every man on SEAL Team 7 owes his life to this woman," Andy said, finally lowering his salute but remaining at attention. "Miller is home with his kids because of her. Rodriguez saw his daughter graduate because of her. Thompson made it to his wedding because of her. And I'm standing here today because Commander Monroe refused to leave us behind." From across the room, Thompson the Marine with the Purple Heart, Jason had pointed out earlier, suddenly stood. "Holy hell," he breathed. "You're Spectre 1. You're the ghost pilot from the Korengal." Before I could respond, Thompson's hand was at his brow, saluting. Then another veteran stood, an Army Ranger with a prosthetic leg. Then another, and another, like a wave spreading across the room. Every real combat veteran in attendance rose to their feet and saluted. Not the polite, cursory salute of military courtesy, but the deep, sustained salute of profound respect. "No," my father said weakly, his colonel's bearing crumbling. "That's impossible. She works in logistics." Andy turned to face him, and there was something dangerous in those gray eyes. "Colonel Monroe, with all due respect, your daughter is one of the finest officers I've served with. She flew classified operations for 7 years, missions that don't exist, in places we've never been, saving people who were never there, the kind of operations that keep America safe but can never be acknowledged. But," Mom's voice was barely a whisper, "she never said." "Because she couldn't," Andy replied, his tone softening slightly. "Commander Monroe holds a classification level so high that violating it would be treason. She's been carrying the weight of her service in silence, letting you believe she was nobody, because that's what duty demanded." Jason pushed through the crowd, his tactical costume looking suddenly ridiculous next to Andy's earned uniform. "This is bullshit," he spat. "Alyssa's never done anything like that. She flies a desk. She's the reason I'm alive." Andy cut him off, his voice sharp enough to draw blood. "And until you've flown a helicopter through mountain passes at night while taking RPG fire, until you've carried wounded operators across active battlefields, until you've earned the right to be called Spectre 1, I suggest you shut your mouth and show some respect." The silence that followed was deafening. Jason stumbled backward, his face cycling through confusion, anger, and something that looked like fear. Andy reached into his pocket and pulled out a challenge coin, not the one he'd given me, but another. He held it up for the room to see. "This is the SEAL Team 7 coin. We don't give these lightly. The only non-SEAL who's ever received one is standing right there." He pointed at me. "Because warrior isn't about your branch or your gender or how loud you can talk about your service. It's about what you do when everything goes to hell and lives are on the line." He turned back to me, and this time when he saluted, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Commander Monroe, it's the greatest honor of my life to finally, publicly, say thank you." The room erupted, not in applause, but in something more powerful, a deep, resonant hurrah from the Marines, hooah from the Army veterans, and Andy's lone hoo-yah that cut through it all. The sound was primal, respectful, the warrior's acknowledgement of one of their own. I stood slowly, my legs unsteady, and returned the salute. When I lowered my hand, I found my father staring at me like he'd never seen me before. Mom had both hands pressed to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. And Jason looked like someone had pulled his entire world out from under him. "Ladies and gentlemen," Andy addressed the room, though his eyes never left mine. "You're in the presence of a genuine American hero, one who can never be fully recognized for her service, who will never have her medals displayed in public, whose stories will remain classified long after we're all gone. But tonight, in this room, we see her. We know her. We salute her." He stepped closer, lowering his voice so only those nearest could hear. "They called you a disappointment. They said you embarrassed the family." His eyes flicked to my parents, then back to me. "The only embarrassment here is that they never knew they were sitting next to greatness." The challenge coin in my pocket seemed to burn against my palm, its weight finally matching its worth. For 7 years, I'd been a ghost. For 7 years, I'd been silent. But tonight, in front of everyone who'd ever dismissed me, Captain Andrew Cole had made me visible. The applause that rose from the veterans was different from anything I'd heard before, not the polite clapping of obligation or the enthusiastic noise of celebration, but something deeper. It was recognition, pure and simple, the sound of warriors acknowledging one of their own. I stood there in my dress blues, no longer invisible, as the room reorganized itself around this new reality. The investors and politicians who'd come to celebrate Jason's hollow achievement suddenly seemed small, their importance diminished by the weight of actual service filling the space. My father tried to speak twice before words finally came. "Alyssa, why didn't you ever—" She couldn't. Andy answered for me, his voice steady but not unkind. "And the fact that she honored that silence, even while you—" He stopped himself, professional enough not to finish that sentence. "Colonel Monroe, your daughter is everything a military officer should be." Mom had moved closer, reaching out tentatively like she was afraid I might disappear. "All those dinners," she whispered. "All those times we said, 'Oh God, what have we done?'" Jason stood frozen by the stage, his award forgotten on the podium, his tactical costume making him look like a child playing dress-up. The contrast between his manufactured military persona and the real veterans saluting me was sharp enough to cut. I finally found my voice, and when I spoke, it was calm, not cruel, just clear. "You said I embarrassed the family, that I should try not to draw the wrong kind of attention, that I was a disappointment compared to Jason and his real service." Each word landed like a precision strike. Dad flinched, Mom sobbed, Jason looked away. "I carried that weight along with everything else," I continued, my voice growing stronger. "Every mission I couldn't talk about, every soldier I saved whose name I couldn't speak, every night terror I couldn't explain to a therapist, I carried it all in silence while you told me I wasn't enough." "We didn't know," Dad said weakly. "No," I agreed. "You didn't know because you never asked. You never looked past your assumptions about what a warrior looks like, what service means, what women in the military are capable of. You had a hero sitting at your table, and you were too busy celebrating a fantasy to see it." I turned to Andy, who was watching with those steady gray eyes. "Captain Cole, thank you for finding me, for standing up when no one else could, for making it impossible to ignore the truth." He nodded once, sharp and definitive. "The honor is mine, Commander. It always has been." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the challenge coin he'd given me, holding it up so it caught the light. "You said I embarrassed the family," I said, looking directly at my parents. "I only ever tried to serve it." The coin was heavy in my palm, warm from being pressed against my heart all evening. Around the room, other veterans were pulling out their own coins, raising them in silent salute. The gesture rippled through the crowd, warriors recognizing a warrior, regardless of branch, gender, or the secrets they carried. Greg Monroe, Colonel, United States Army retired, stood at attention for perhaps the first time since his retirement ceremony. His salute was textbook perfect, the kind he'd probably rehearsed 1,000 times in the mirror. But when his eyes met mine, they were filled with something I'd never seen before. Genuine respect mixed with devastating regret. "Commander Monroe," he said formally, his voice cracking slightly. I owe you an apology that I can never fully make. You're not just a credit to your uniform. You're the kind of officer I should have recognized from the beginning, the kind I should have been proud of every single day." But I wasn't looking for apologies anymore. I wasn't looking for validation from people who'd shown me their true colors when they thought I was nobody. The validation I needed was standing right there in navy whites, surrounded by Marines and soldiers and airmen who understood what service really meant. Andy spoke one more time, his voice carrying that command authority that filled every corner of the room. "You raised a soldier the right way," he told my parents softly. "Even if you never saw her." I turned toward the exit, my footsteps steady on the marble floor. Behind me, the applause rose again, not stopping this time. It followed me through the doors and into the humid Savannah night, where I finally let myself breathe fully for the first time in years. My phone buzzed with messages numbers I didn't recognize, veterans from the event reaching out, people who'd heard Spectre 1 and understood what it meant, but I didn't read them yet. Instead, I stood under the stars, the same stars I'd navigated by on countless night missions, and felt the weight of silence finally lifting from my shoulders. My revenge wasn't in the words I'd spoken or the shame on my family's faces. It wasn't in Jason's humiliation or my parents' regret. It was in this, the simple, undeniable recognition that couldn't be taken back. The salute of warriors who knew what real service looked like. The truth, finally louder than silence. In my palm, the challenge coin caught the streetlight, its inscription clear in the darkness, "For valor above silence." Tonight, in front of everyone who'd ever dismissed me, I'd finally been seen. And that was enough. The unit coin glinting in my hand reflected not just the restaurant lights behind me, but something more truth that had waited 7 years to shine, finally free from the shadows where heroes sometimes have to hide. Thank you for listening to this story. Where are you tuning in from today? I'd love to hear from listeners around the world in the comments below. If this story of hidden valor and family recognition resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts about Alyssa's journey. What would you have done in her shoes? Let's discuss in the comments.